All right, welcome everyone. To everyone who's joining us here on the webinar, as well as those who are tuning in to Facebook. Happy Radon Awareness Month for January 2022. And thank you for tuning in to our webinar today titled What Every School Needs to Know About Radon. I'm Taylor Musil. I'm the Health Policy Manager at Women for a Healthy Environment, and I'm joined by two guests. Our first is Nate Burden, who is the president of the PA chapter of the American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists. He is a radon scientist, consultant, and training instructor. In fact, I believe he was doing a long training with new remediators for radon today. And he sits on the Radon Protection Advisory Committee and the National Radon Action Plan Committee. And we're also joined by Michelle Nakarati-Chapkas, who is a colleague of mine at Women for a Healthy Environment. She is our executive director, and Women for a Healthy Environment is a nonprofit that addresses environmental harms in the built environment, including addressing lead and radon hazards in schools and early learning centers. So with that, I will kick it over to Nate to get us started, to go over some of the basics of radon and why it's a concern in schools, how it impacts our health, and what testing and remediation looks like. And Michelle then will give us an overview of some local initiatives that can provide funding and resources for addressing this in our schools and early learning centers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nate.
All right, I'll take over. My name is Nate Burden. As Taylor has introduced me, I want to go over some basic things about radon. You may already know some of these things in webinars or documentation you've read online or whatever, but we want to make sure everybody understands why it is so critical that we understand what radon is, why the risk is really what it is, and why that every school in the state of Pennsylvania should be tested for radon, especially for our children. So the radon facts: radon is a radioactive gas. It is odorless, tasteless, colorless. So it's not on our radar. It's not stinky. It doesn't smell. It doesn't glow in the dark. Doesn't do any of that. But because it's radioactive, because it's a gas, we can breathe that in along with the radon decay products, and that's what causes lung cancer. So the radiation from the radioactive radon decay products, they decay from the radon gas, come into our lungs, and we'll go a little bit through there so I can sort of define that risk, that it's real. So it's not just someone stating that radon causes lung cancer. I'll give you a quick one-on-one on some of the mechanics of how radon can cause lung cancer. It comes from the decay of radium and uranium in the ground that breaks down and decays into radium and then into radon gas. And Pennsylvania has a geological formation called the Redding Prong that has a lot of uranium, and Pennsylvania has the highest radon levels probably in the world. It's probably, as Bob Lewis from the Pennsylvania DEP has stated, our state is probably the state has been most impacted by radon basically across all the counties in the state of Pennsylvania. EPA says about 15% of the homes in the US have unsafe or elevated radon levels. Radon carries approximately 1,000 times the risk of death as any other EPA carcinogen. We're talking about mold. We're talking about even some of the chemicals, that you read about. Next slide. Before we talk about radon, let's talk about cancer. So people, when I say cancer, we need to understand what that means. Cancer is when cells, the DNA and genes are damaged, and specifically a specific gene that controls the growth control of a cell. It gets damaged or it doesn't repair itself, and now that cell grows out of control. These cells multiply and then create a tumor, and that tumor then spreads and migrates or are metastasized to other parts of the body. And cancer is something that we're deeply concerned about, and lung cancer is the #1 cancer killer compared to the other types of cancer. The other cancers do kill and can cause damage and major problems, but the #1 cancer killer on all the different types of cancer is lung cancer. Lung cancer usually is not diagnosed till later stages. It's not something where we catch it in stage 1. It's rare that we find that we're catching it in stage 1A, we're usually catching it in stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4. And the later the stage, the less the survivability when it is diagnosed. It's estimated for 2019, for instance, 228,000 people will be diagnosed with lung cancer. Obviously, smoking is the #1 cause of lung cancer, okay, from just the tobacco, smoke, all the different chemicals in there. And the American Lung Association actually goes through a lot of that information, how smoking can cause lung cancer, and that everybody should stop smoking or go through a smoking cessation program if you use cigarettes or other tobacco products. Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer, causes about 21,000 lung cancer, radon-induced lung cancer deaths in the United States, okay? The World Health Organization looks at it as the second leading cause of lung cancer for that. The action level was set at 4.0 picocuries per liter. And one key point is for never smokers. These are people that never smoked cigarettes. It's the #1 cause of lung cancer death for people that never smoked. Next slide. The genetic damage to the lung cells is caused by radiation from radon and the radon decay products, polonium-218 and polonium-214. You breathe those in, it causes damage to that cell genetically, and indirect, well, causing a chemical reaction, breaking down the water, and you damage the DNA where it does not repair itself, it mutates. Now that cell loses its growth control and starts growing uncontrollably. And it starts, growing more and more, and then becomes a malignant cancer that can spread and metastasize throughout the body. And we look at that and classifying that in different stages. Next. As I said before, lung cancer, what stage is it detected? Lung cancer basically is always detected in the later stages. Nationally, only 21.5% of the cases are caught early when the 5-year survival rate is much higher. Okay, so again, it's usually discovered in stage 2B, stage 3, or even stage 4. So, you begin to see that the majority of the lung cancers are not caught in early detection. Next slide. Making radon risks visible. Again, everyone's not a nuclear physicist, even though I'm a physicist and went to Carnegie Mellon and all that, worked as a nuclear operator, I wanted to find a picture that sort of highlighted what the big deal is. This is actually a picture in Pennsylvania, in a Pennsylvania house. The house was tested at 100 picocuries per liter. Okay, therefore, what you are seeing is the actual radon gas in the air that is decaying, and those little streaks are alpha particles that are coming from the decay of radon. When you breathe in, that's actually what is happening in your lungs. Those little bullet streaks, almost like forensic, you can see those tracer bullets, zipping around inside your lungs, hitting your bare lung cells, your basal cells, and causing damage. And that's how radon causes damage to the cells by these radioactive particles called alpha radiation. It causes what we call ionization, okay, and it causes damage to the cells. Now, for children, the normal respiratory rate for an adult at rest is about 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Now, let's look at children. Normal respiration for preschoolers is 22 to 34 breaths per minute, and even faster when playing and running. Normal respiration for school-age kids, 18 to 30 breaths per minute. This is what's happening in a school that you're spending a long, huge amount of time in there where kids are breathing that in, even at rest. And if they're doing anything inside that building, the gym, in all the other areas, then you begin to understand why we have a concern and why EPA has stated that every single school in the country should be tested for radon, especially Pennsylvania, that is known to have very high radon levels in this state. Children are more susceptible to radiation damage than adults. Children spend 1,000 hours in schools and preschools and built environments. Many schools in PA have elevated high radon levels. Next slide. This is Pennsylvania. This is actually the EPA Radon Zone Map. The red areas have a high potential of having radon levels above 4 picocuries per liter. In Lehigh Valley and Allentown, PA, we have measured radon levels as high as 17,000 picocuries per liter. Remember, the action level is 4. In Harrisburg, there's areas around that area we've measured 3,000 to 6,000 picocuries per liter. And even in the Pennsylvania Allegheny County area, we've measured levels over 200 picocuries per liter. And this is where, again, where we live at. So this is a concern that we want to look at, but I just want you to note, this is the Pennsylvania zone map. Next slide. This is actually a Pennsylvania radon report done by the American Association of Radon Scientists and Technologists. And this is basically the data. Okay, we're looking at in Pennsylvania, for instance, the lung cancer deaths is 6,778. Again, you just want to look at that. And the lung cancer cases is 10,805 cases every year that are occurring in the state of Pennsylvania. Those are actual cases. Estimated radon-induced lung cancers is estimated to be 3,018. Okay, therefore you get a general idea why that's critical. Now we look over on the other side, housing data, how many houses? So we're looking at units 1 to say 4, about 5 million units or houses have, these are houses that there's 1 or 2 units. And then you go to 5 units and multifamily units, and you see that goes up even bigger. So you just get a general idea. Then it gives you the total amount of existing housing in the United States. Now look down at the bottom. In the public schools, there's 2,947 public schools. That doesn't even include daycare centers and preschool facilities. Next slide. Okay, this is actually a picture of Allegheny County. This is a map that's sort of old, and I think this map would even be more redder than what it is with current data. But this is an old map, but it does show, notice in the areas where the areas are that deep prime rose red, those are the highest radon levels. The orange levels are also tested high. And even in the yellow areas, we're still getting radon tests over sometimes 100 picocuries per liter in the yellow. This simply shows that the probability when we do a radon test is higher in the red and orange, orange areas of the zip codes than the yellow areas. So we just want to be aware of that. But notice here, when you look at these different zip codes, a lot of our schools are located there. A lot of our daycare centers are located there. Our preschool facilities are located there. That's just something to be aware of, that radon in Allegheny County is throughout the whole area. Next slide. This is a map. How does radon get in? Remember, it's the gas. Therefore, it's coming up through the ground. And if you know anything about your high school chemistry, gases tend to go from a greater concentration to a lesser concentration called concentration gradient diffusion. So the gases see that negative pressure. It could be a furnace or a heater operating, and lower ground contact areas tend to be at lower pressures, drawing more radon soil gas up through cracks. You've got sump pits. You've got cracks in the walls that are below grade. You've got some older houses that actually are just wood and don't have a concrete floor. We've got a lot of old houses in the state of Pennsylvania that were built in the 1940s and the 1950s, after World War II. We used to have the steel mills and all that going on with Pittsburgh itself. So there's all these different ways that radon can get into the actual area. Even if you have a well water for private wells, there's even radon in the water that can also degas out into the volume space where people live. Next slide. Again, why do radon levels fluctuate from the school to school? This is what one school attendant and actually one of the state senators asked is, why does that happen? Why aren't all the schools the same level? You know, so more than 70,000 classrooms in the US have high radon levels. So that's something to be aware of. The concentrations of radon gas in the soil based on geology. Remember I talked about there's a high level of uranium and radioactive material from the glaciers when they moved across, actually uptill the uranium near the surface. Therefore, the Redding Prong area, which is a geological formation that runs across Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania tends to have high uranium content, thus high radon levels that can occur across the whole state. So again, that's one thing to remember. Construction and age of the school, cracks and penetration. I showed you the picture before. You know, think about your schools that have the furnaces, the gas furnaces, all the cracks and foundation, the pores when they pour that. So you've got all those different radon entry routes. And remember, a lot of our schools are slab on grade. Therefore, the radon is coming directly into the classroom. So that's something we want to be aware of. Operation and type of maintenance, the HVAC systems, and they tend to be higher in the wintertime than the summertime, which is why EPA wants us to do the radon testing, recommends that the testing be done in the months of October till March. That's the highest time that you want to do that. Also, over time, building settlement, maintenance repairs, and renovations can cause radon levels to change. That's the recommendation that schools, at a minimum, be tested for radon every year. Well, I tested my school 8 years ago and didn't have a radon problem. Does not mean it won't have a radon problem now. So we need to really retest schools every 5 years because the radon levels can change just due to physical structure changes and renovation changes that can actually exacerbate the radon levels in the school. The only way you're going to know that is the test. This is why it's critical that all PA schools and preschool facilities be tested for radon. This is why building radon resistant new construction design in planned new schools and childcare facilities is important. It's way cheaper to build that into the school as it's being built than to wait until after the school is built, find out it has elevated levels, and then hire a radon mitigator to come in. We're talking about as cheap as 70 to 90%. It makes sense to do radon resistant new construction in schools. Next slide. Consideration of COVID safety, HVAC ventilation actions with CARES Act. I sit on a task force for the Pennsylvania DOH called the COVID Task Force, and part of our job is to review all the data coming in and seeing about that, getting more people vaccinated so we can save lives, make people more aware of correct information instead of misinformation, especially in disadvantaged and minority communities. We want to make sure that everybody understands about health equity and being able to take, advantage of the things that can help save lives, when basically we're approaching 1 million people will die from COVID, from the COVID virus infection. I think we're around 800,000 now, and they're predicting somewhere around May or June, we may reach 1 million people dying from COVID. Now for schools, this is a big deal. You have the coronavirus, AIDS relief, and economic security, CARES Act. Division B includes appropriations for several programs and initiatives. $1 billion for a Defense Production Act purchases of personal protective equipment, medical equipment, and anything that deals with indoor air quality. One of the concerns is that a lot of schools now are trying to have, they want all the kids there. So they're trying to do engineering controls and bringing in fresh air, changing our HVAC systems to bring in fresh air and to dilute the air and to reduce the risk of the kids transmitting the coronavirus from one kid to another kid while they're in there, besides wearing masks and all the other PPE that is related to that. One of the things that can happen when you're changing the HVAC in a school, you can inadvertently change pressure differentials in the school that can actually exacerbate or potentially increase the radon levels in the school. How are you going to know that? unless you do a radon testing. So one of the things I am proposing that radon testing should be part of your COVID active response for every single school whenever you're doing a COVID response. This is one of the things I'm speaking about to EPA. I know EPA is also working on giving more information and more training to the school maintenance and facility staff. Next slide. Now, radon testing. How do we test for schools? We use short-term charcoal canisters. These cost about $8 to $15, so it's not super expensive. And we even have a program, Women for Healthy Environment will go more into that, where we're actually actively training our schools' facilities. I've already done that for several school districts already. I'll be glad to do that for any school district that wants specific training and how to use your own people to place and pick up detectors. It's a lot cheaper that way. Okay, so we'll deal with that. But basically, it's either a charcoal canister in a can, or there's a special paper bag called an air check that a lot of schools are using when doing their radon testing. Next test. Basic radon testing criteria. This is important for schools to recognize this. Radon testing should be performed in colder months through October through March. That is the recommendation by EPA. Radon testing should be performed when the school is not occupied, not on holidays, breaks, or weekends. You want to make sure that the standard operating systems are operating as if the school is occupied. That gives me the most representative radon levels that will be in that school when kids are there. It's not important if the school was shut down, the HVAC systems are down to what we call setback level, then whatever the radon levels, no one's there, so we don't care about that. We care when the schools are occupied, so we want to make sure we're not doing it on spring break, or or when the HVAC system has been put on setback in the summertime. That's the worst time to do the radon testing for schools. Other renovation, repairs, or other activities should not be performed during the test. Recommended test duration is 3 to 5 days. 2-day testing generally is not recommended. And there's a reason for that we won't go into now, that when we go to the actual training course, we go over that. Recommend that school buildings retest every 5 years, or if there has been major renovations performed, HVAC, major plumbing, construction, or building addition. Next slide. Where to test? All frequently occupied rooms, rooms over crawl spaces. If there are more floors than standard floors, then standard guidance does not require testing on the upper floors. There is some push where we want to maybe do 10% testing on the upper floors just to see if there is some rise or migration up to the upper levels. But generally, the focus is on the bottom. If those areas are elevated, then you're sort of addressing that. That will eliminate all the radon in the total building envelope. Place the detectors every 2,000 square feet. Next slide. Radon mitigation systems at schools and daycare. Radon mitigation installations costs can vary, and I get this question asked all the time. The estimated range is $3,000 to $10,000 per building, using a certified, trained radon mitigation professional that's trained in doing large buildings and schools. These are just some of the pictures and a diagram of putting pipes in the ground, creating a fan and suction and sealing all the cracks there in that particular building to prevent the radon from coming into that. These systems are 99% effective in reducing the radon levels in schools, and also improve the overall indoor air quality of the school at the same time. Next slide. Basic operation of a radon mitigation system, that's called another name is an active soil depressurization system. It's real simple. You may see this in houses. You're going to dig a hole in the ground floor, a pit, stick a pipe in, maybe 2 suction holes. We're going to seal all the cracks, and then we're going to run that pipe up with a mitigation fan that's going to create a suction pressure to suck the radon gas up through these pipes before it gets into the living envelope, or the living envelope volume space of the school building. That's how it works. Next slide. This is actually a picture, and look at the date, 2001. This is in outside of Philadelphia in Bucks County. This is Council Rock School District on a brand new school they built. And this is actually radon resistant new construction. The cost of this was way cheaper than one of their other schools. We spent over $50,000. Doing something like this probably costs less than $8,000. This just shows you a passive system being put in that makes the school radon resistant. Next slide. And I'm done. Your turn now, Michelle.
Thank you, Nate. Good afternoon, everyone. As Taylor mentioned earlier, my name is Michelle Nakarati-Chapkis, and I'm Executive Director at Women for a Healthy Environment. And our nonprofit organization focuses on those environmental exposures that impact public health. And as we're hearing more about radon today, I'm going to talk a little bit about a program that was launched several years ago in collaboration with our organization and the Green Building Alliance, with support from the Heinz Endowments. So to give you a little bit of background in terms of data that we have access to and that we share with the community, this past summer, we released our State of Environmental Health in Pennsylvania Schools report. This is the second time that this report has been released. The first one was in 2018. And through that report, we, through a right to know process, reach out to public school districts all across the Commonwealth to really get a baseline of data that they have about their buildings that really speaks to how they're addressing environmental health. And so that could be in terms of air quality, water quality in their spaces, asthma rates, the type of cleaning products and frequency of which they use them, those types of things. And so we compile all of that data into a report, and then we utilize that for a number of reasons. One is to share with schools so that they can see where progress is being made and give suggestions for improvements. We also share that data with policymakers, and in terms of thinking about some strategies that we would seek to employ to really think about policy implementation and adoption at the state level, such as you were hearing earlier about needing the requirement to test schools for radon every 5 years, which other states have done and Pennsylvania has not done yet. You'll hear a little bit more about some of those policy recommendations tomorrow if you tune into the radon webinar that's scheduled tomorrow morning. So what do we know in terms of Pennsylvania? In the State of the Schools report, we looked at all of the school districts within Southwestern PA where we are headquartered, and then we did a sampling of school districts across the state. And so for those 99 school districts that are in Southwestern PA that we took a look at, we know that of those, 24 school districts had tested for radon. And so they did that a lot of the time in collaboration with our 1,000 hours a year program, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And so what we found with those 24 school districts is that of those, 38% had reported exceedances that Nate had spoken about earlier. So that meant that within their buildings, within that district, there were classrooms that were above that 4 picocuries per liter. And of those 38% that reported exceedances, 1/3 had remediated. So one of the things that is alarming to us is that when schools are perhaps identifying the radon elevations, oftentimes they're not moving forward to the remediation strategy. And so that's when our 1,000 hours a year program comes into play, which offers school districts and early learning centers the funding to both test and remediate for radon. Now, when we took a sampling of the statewide school districts, as you see in the image to your left, there was a sample size of 65 school districts across the Commonwealth. And of those, we know that 20% of those school districts had conducted testing for radon, and 38% of those that tested had exceedances of the 4 picocuries per liter, and 40% had moved toward remediation and installed the mitigation systems that Nate had spoken about. So what this is telling us is that from a policy perspective, it would be significant and important to have a policy in place that would require schools to move toward the testing, because what we do know about radon, as we do with other environmental hazards, is that The science is clear, it impacts public health. But what we know about radon, as Nate has just explained, is that there are solutions that are readily available to addressing the problem. And so we have an opportunity to fix it and move on then to look at other various initiatives that are needed inside of a school building. So that's one of the things that we really have talked about with school districts across the Commonwealth, is that by investing in your school building, you're investing in that the school community's public health. So next slide. What are my legal responsibilities? Currently, Pennsylvania schools are not required to test for radon, as I mentioned. If you test for radon in your school building and any results indicate a level of 4 picocuries per liter, you must report that to the DEP radon program. In a statewide survey, 65% of these school districts, only 20% had tested for radon. 38% of those who did test reported at least one occupied classroom or space that had a level above the EPA action level. So just to give you a little bit of background and to put this into perspective, and with one of the school districts that we actually worked very closely with, they had of the 31 classrooms that were tested, 14, almost half of those classrooms had exceeded the action level. So it's something that is relevant, it's a priority, and it's happening throughout our school districts on a regular basis. The average cost to test a school building is $1,400. We say that that's money well spent in investment in your school occupants, the occupants' health. And certainly, you know, this is something that is within a bigger strategy effort where schools can learn from each other. And as Nate talked about, there's an opportunity for those facility directors and the custodial and maintenance staff within those buildings to have the ability to receive the proper certification to test for themselves within the district in which they work. So we strongly recommend testing your buildings for radon if you have not tested in the past 5 to 10 years. If you have undergone a major renovation, or if you are unsure if you have ever tested. We will certainly help you find sustainable solutions if a problem is found. So radon exposure, again, is preventable, and that's why we're here to talk with you today. Next slide. So let's talk about the 1,000 Hours Initiative. As I mentioned earlier, it's an initiative between Women for a Healthy Environment and the Green Building Alliance. Both of our organizations have school program initiatives where we are looking to both inform and educate and provide technical assistance to school personnel. It is funded by the Heinz Endowments, and right now we are on a 2-year program with about $200,000 in grant funding for schools and early learning centers to address both lead and radon. Again, environmental hazards that are known but preventable. We offer training and resources and technical assistance for free to new and past grant partners. So this includes writing a communication plan to share and interpret that data, those results that you get as a result of the testing, to create a sampling plan for lead and radon testing, to work with the consultants who are experts in this space, to offer radon certification training for school facility personnel, and much more. So how do you go about doing that? Right now, this program is only available to the Southwestern PA region. We'll hope to expand that in good time. But if you go to visit 1000hoursAyear.org, and so why is it called 1,000 hours a year? That's about on average the amount of time that children spend in a school building. And actually that number is probably even a little bit higher. If you look at 180 days of learning and about 7 hours a day, you're upward of 1,400 hours a year, which is a lot of time spent in school buildings. So go to 1000hoursAyear.org, the website, and believe that there might be a snapshot of it on the next slide. And this is what it'll look like. So you'll go to how to apply for a grant. There's a frequently asked questions section on the site. And then there's an online JOT form application where you will go in and put data and demographics about your district. Here it is. This is a sample. Again, this is what you'll see when you visit the site. And you'll put that information in, whether it's you want to have the request for funding to test and to remediate for radon. And you can also do that, as I mentioned earlier, for lead. But again, these environmental harms we know are preventable. So we're looking to identify solutions across the Commonwealth and within our school buildings so that we can make sure that those who are most vulnerable, the children, but also the teachers and the school personnel who spend hours and hours a day in these buildings are protected. Next slide. So we'll stop and have questions, but I will just share with you all that the responses that we've gotten and the feedback that we've gotten from the school personnel who have worked with us to both go through the testing and the remediation strategies in their school facilities has been overwhelmingly positive. We really help to ease that process to make it so we recognize that school personnel have busy days. And so we do what we can to provide that liaisonship between consultants and getting that proper testing and mitigation in place, working with the school personnel, as we mentioned, in communication so that they can inform and educate the parents and their staff, and really trying to simplify the process so that we can ensure that the buildings are healthy, safe spaces for both, as I mentioned, the school staff and also the children. So with that, I'll stop and let's see if there are any questions here. Taylor, are you familiar with any that might be in the chat? I know that we have two places to look, online here and on Facebook. So we'll take just a moment to pause.
No, thank you, Michelle. And I do want to just take a moment to thank both Michelle for her overview of the program and the resources that are available to schools in the region, and also to Nate, who we're so lucky to have in this region and really nationally as an expert on this topic, and is incredible at really making things work and connecting people to resources when needed. But I don't see any questions yet, and we'll keep monitoring that. Whether you're on Facebook, feel free to drop it in the comments, or here in the webinar in the chat or the Q&A box. But I am curious, and this is probably more of a question for Michelle, but you showed us a lot about how to apply for the program and the process of that. But if you could provide a little bit more of an overview around like what the requirements are, if I'm a school or early learning center looking to maybe get involved with the 1,000 Hours Initiative.
Oh, sure. It's a great question. So, one of the things that I want to mention is that folks might be familiar with the American Rescue Plan Act funds, also known as ARPA. And so last summer, probably about May or June of last year, when that funding was being distributed to school districts, we had put together a webinar and distributed that, and folks are welcome to take a look at that as well, to really call for school districts to invest in their school buildings. We know we have aging infrastructure across the Northeast, and Pennsylvania is one of many. And as a result, we know that our school buildings are on average about 60 years old. And so we really need to be thinking about how we properly care and maintain those buildings and do the testing that's necessary to ensure their safety. We know that when we have healthy buildings, we have better academic performance and achievement with students. So for the 1,000 Hours program, we've seen it in a multiple of ways. We've seen superintendents reach out to us, facility directors, as well as business managers, all have a role to play. And so any of those folks have reached out and completed the JOT form. And then that comes into us, and then we'll work through what we know is the size of the school district, the number of buildings, and what would be needed from a financial perspective based on the data that we have to both test and then ensure that mitigation strategy is there as well. And so it's pretty straightforward. We'll work hand in hand with the team at the school district that's been identified. And we'll certainly be able to, we enter into a grant agreement, and generally that grant agreement is 6 months to a year long to provide time for all of that proper testing to occur, because there's some planning that has to be put into place. We do certainly emphasize that school districts who are identified and are situated within environmental justice communities should apply. We really want to make certain that those who might not have as many resources are given the opportunity to participate in the program. And so if you're a school district that really is struggling with funding and looking for ways to really addressing these hazards as we talk about today, reach out to us and we'll be able to certainly work with you. Anything else, Taylor?
You answered that question very thoroughly. Thank you, Michelle. I had a question for Nate. This was mentioned a couple different times throughout the webinar today about the opportunity for kind of alternatively training staff or facility directors within your own school community to conduct testing. And so I imagine that there will be schools who might be interested in pursuing that, for cost-effective reasons. And so Nate, would you mind describing like what that process looks like for, a facility director or a school staff person to be able to be equipped to do that testing on their own?
Sure. We have both Women for Healthy Environment and the American Lung Association actually will sponsor and actually do training for school districts. So for our training course, we actually go through the whole thing as we would do for a radon tester. And what are what are radon tests? What are the protocols? Where do you place the tests at? How many tests are should be in your school? So we'll go through a layout of your school and determine how many radon tests need to be done. And then we train you as the facilitators and maintenance personnel in how to do that testing, how to do the logistics of managing, placing the test, picking up the test, and getting the test back to the laboratory. Now we get the data. I will review it with that school district. We will write a report with recommendations if there is elevated levels. We may do further retesting to confirm that. And then we'll bring in a radon mitigation company and we'll try to minimize the cost, but make sure we address the elevated radon levels and reduce that down. And it's from an A to Z. We work with you all the way through as the radon consultant, along with the Women for Healthy Environment and the American Lung Association in implementing this program. So we test schools. So it should not be a reason that for money or whatever, why we cannot test the school. And it's cheaper using your own personnel than hiring a radon professional testing company. You could easily save anywhere from 50 to 80% just in testing, where mainly all you're paying for is just the test devices themselves and not actually a certified person and their crew coming in, placing or picking up the detectors. So it makes sense, and it's a way to address this. So it should not be a reason for why you're not testing the school.
Thank you, Nate. The support is definitely there, to make sure that we can both support school communities in doing their own testing as well as the remediation resources following. And so I think unless we have another question, this will be the last one, but I'm curious, Michelle, from your perspective, what kind of advice, or can you explain a little bit more about what happens if elevated levels are found, right? If you're in this program and you find that there's elevated levels in a number of classrooms, what's sort of the immediate next step to make sure that the students are protected and the information goes to the right places?
So I think Nate and I will tag team a little bit on this one, since he also has experience. But when we do, so for instance, we're working with a school district right now who has elevated levels in several classrooms. And so then what happens next is there's, in some instances, additional testing that is required. And so for instance, this particular testing is looking at the wall space in between classrooms. And so sometimes we have to take that extra step and do a little bit more testing to then help get the data and understand what type of mitigation system will work best for that type of situation. So we'll work with both the testing company, the radon detection company that has been hired for this process, as well as the school personnel, oftentimes, as I mentioned, the facility director, then to formulate a plan for not only any type of remaining testing that needs to be done, but also then that mitigation strategy that has to be put into place. And so that will happen generally off hours as soon as not to disturb students when they're in the classroom during the school day. But that is something that will move toward fairly quickly so that we can ensure that we've got a system in place to protect, again, occupant health. And Nate, did you want to say anything further about that? And while he's going on, if Nate's on mute, then I'll just say then too, one of the things that we really emphasize is communication to the school community. That's really important as well, because we think that the most transparent a school district can be with its community, with its parents, then helps to alleviate concerns, but also demonstrates that you're investing in your school community health. And so we want school districts to be as forthcoming with information and say, This is a plan. We've actually taken great strides to doing what's best for your school, for our school community by testing. And now we're going to move toward a mitigation plan. And so, we'll help work on the communication strategy for how messaging gets out in terms of making sure that there's any questions that we foresee might come up from the community that we can address in the forward, being proactive in that space and working with school board members as well. Nate, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, the other thing is that, once say a school has elevated radon levels, it's not a big production. We have the technology, the science to address this very quickly. So, even within basically a month, most of this could be done very quickly, from testing to the radon mitigation. And we do post-testing after that to verify that the radon mitigation system is effective in lowering the radon levels below the EPA action level of 4.0 picocuries per liter. Again, it's very simple. It's very well done. We've done this across the country. And the point is, it's something that we can do to prevent and improve the overall indoor air quality of the school for not only the children, but also for the adults, because they work there. And this is something that easily can be done and is a lot cheaper than trying to address a lung cancer, which can basically is estimated to be about $100,000 for the treatment cost per person that gets lung cancer.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, that's a perfect note to end on. I think that prevention is key. And, that's really what this program focuses on, is primary prevention in order to, get ahead of exposure and protect health ahead of time. So I'm going to just end with two plugs for upcoming opportunities. So the first is that, given that we are in Radon Awareness Month and it's the perfect time to do testing, of course, we have all the resources we already discussed today about schools and early learning centers, but we do also offer home radon test kits. And so I'll drop a link to that in the chat here. It'll also be shared on Facebook, but this is a free resource we have for anyone who would like to order a test kit for their home, and you will get those results back from a certified lab. The second thing I wanted to plug is that tomorrow morning at 8:30, bright and early, we will be doing the second part of this webinar series. And this webinar will focus on how policymakers can lend a voice to the silent hazard. So we, heard mentioned today several times that it's not required for schools to test for radon. And, while it's a voluntary choice right now, it's hard to really have data on where radon is, where is mitigation needed, where do we need to provide resources and partner with schools to make sure that it's a radon safe environment. And we think that there are policies that wouldn't be overly burdensome. It would be fairly simple to implement and would really protect significantly public health and student health. So join us tomorrow at 8:30. We'll drop the link to register for that. And we hope you will join us for that tomorrow. And both of the webinar recordings will be available by Facebook and then in a follow-up email. And with that, I will close us out unless there's anything else you'd like to share, Michelle or Nate.
I want to just thank the two of you. This has been a great presentation, and I'll look forward to sharing this presentation with others so that they'll know more about the opportunities that are available and they can participate in the 1,000 hours a year program. So thank you very much.
Thank you.